Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, real insights are finally coming to light on how Target was hacked. We'll give you the technical details on this massive breach. Then researchers find over 150 zero-day flaws in industrial control systems, and you won't believe what they can do. Then it's a great big batch of your questions, our answers, and much, much more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 145 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. We stream this episode live on January 16th, 2014. This episode is brought to you by our two fine sponsors, GoDaddy.com and Ting.com. I'll tell you more about those great sponsors as this show goes on, and our live stream is powered by the incredible Scale Engine over at ScaleEngine.com. You got to go check that out. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the admin, the tech, and the teacher, Mr. Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, how are you?
Hey, oh, good. I'm pretty good, Alan. You see I'm rocking my Jupiter Broadcasting t-shirt today?
I wore mine yesterday.
Yeah, okay. So you were representing on the BSD Now show.
Yep.
Yeah, very good, sir. Very good. In fact, we were just saying on the pre-show that you had a good chat with two folks from Beehive,
yep.
The Beehive project?
Peter Grehan and Neil Naidu. The two guys that basically started the Beehive project. And we went through everything from our usual question of, like, how did you get into BSD through, when are we going to be able to boot Windows in Beehive? And
so Beehive, quick recap for those who are not following along at home, is the new virtualizer for BSD that they're working on, right?
Yeah, well, it's a BSD licensed hypervisor. It isn't necessarily only for BSD.
Okay.
There's, some interest in porting it to other things.
Gotcha. Well, that sounds like a pretty interesting interview.
Because it's a very, very small code base.
I will hopefully have that out Friday morning over at Jupiter Broadcasting for BSD Now 20. I think that's
I know there's 20? Yep, that'll be 20. Yep.
Wow.
There's quite a few people that are interested in seeing that and couldn't make it for the live show. So.
Yeah. Well, so there's been one story that has definitely threaded its way through the last few tech snaps over the last couple of weeks, and that has been this massive breach at Target. Now, the total customers are estimating is up to 110 million, and Krebs on Security has been doing some really great digging, and we've got some good insights now.
And last week there was almost enough, and I was like, I'm debating putting it in the show, but
yeah.
the big break isn't there yet. But now it is.
Yeah, now we know how it actually happened, don't we? Or at least some mechanics.
Yeah, so, the massive breach resulted in 110 million credit cards being lost, and now we finally have some details about how. The attackers apparently managed to install malware on the point-of-sales terminals used at the checkout lines. Now, the fact that they managed to do this on what appears to be every single point-of-sales terminal at every single Target store, as opposed to, we've talked about other ones before where they distract the clerk, walk up and plug
a USB drive in. Yeah.
Yeah, or a hardware keylogger between the point-of-sales terminals, just typing numbers in as if it was a keyboard into the computer, little PS2 type one or whatever. But it doesn't appear that's what was happening here. Apparently, also, there was a number of other stores and companies that were targeted and breached who haven't come out and publicly admitted it yet. So this attack apparently started even as early as 2012 and was used against a whole bunch of different places. And they all just haven't come out and said it yet.
Yeah, Target's taking the heat, and it could be affecting a lot of people.
Yeah, so it's it kind of seems like now that it's kind of settled in, coming up and being, us too, I think it would look better if you did it now than later, but it also kind of asks the question is, why didn't you do it when you found out a month ago, right?
Yeah, and of course they'll probably use they'll use excuse. We were researching the extent of the breach.
Right. Well, you have to notify your customers right away, otherwise your customers can't take the required steps to protect themselves. And, that's why we have laws in Canada about disclosure and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, an unidentified source told Krebs that apparently they found some ties back to a Windows SharePoint user, TTCOPSCLI3ACS. I have no idea what that's supposed to mean. And it matches a sample analyzed by the malware scanning websites, and the thieves set up a username, best1_user, to be able to log in and download the stolen credit card data with the password backupu $R, as in user.
Mm-hmm.
The class of malware identified by Krebs is often referred to as a memory scraper, because what it does is, when you swipe your card in the point of sales terminal, it briefly keeps the data from the magnetic stripe that it just swiped in its memory so it can do the operations it needs to do to charge your card and see if it worked, so that you don't have to leave your card in it or swipe it multiple times, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the malware is just able to download that and pilfer it. So as if, running your card through a skimmer, except for it was the actual point of sale.
And so
skimmer.
I guess the implication there is the point of sale software was storing it. Would it have to store it in plain text in memory?
No, but it's memory. You don't expect it to be compromised.
Right, yeah.
The point is that the point of sales terminal shouldn't have been exposed to being compromised, right?
Mm-hmm.
It should be isolated and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
They probably shouldn't be running Windows either, but that's a different story.
They were running Windows XP embedded, as a matter of fact, yeah. And the Windows embedded for point of service software. Yeah,
which is basically Windows XP where they're not ending support for
Target's Canadian stores run point of sale devices from Realtek and hardware from NCR. So perhaps not run XP.
So Target's Canadian stores, which they only got recently when they bought them from the Hudson's Bay Company, which is the oldest commercial company in North America because it's been operating for 340 years before Canada or the U.S. were even a country. And according to sources, the RetailX point of sale system will be rolled out at all U.S. locations. So it suggests it's not vulnerable to the same type of attack and is better.
That would appear to be the case.
And there's also a PDF file here that somebody, probably from Target or whoever's investigating for them, uploaded the malware and to a scanner. And it's since been taken down so that people can't read the report, but Krebs grabbed a copy for you.
He sure did, didn't he?
Yep. And US CERT has issued an advisory about the technique and how they're doing it so that other stores are aware to protect their point of sales terminals.
I'm trying to find the... Oh, here it is. Here it is. Okay, so Ars Technica wrote a bit about it, and they said the malware searches for credit card data before it's been encrypted and sent to the remote payment processor. The malware then scrapes it. But one of the things they talked about, which I thought was really interesting, is Krebs went on to report that the sources told him they broke into Target after hacking a company web server. From there, the attackers somehow managed to upload the point-of-sale malware to a checkout machine located at various stores. Sources then said the attackers appeared to then establish a control server inside Target's internal network that served as a central repository for all of the data hoovered up by all the infected point-of-sales devices. The attackers appear to have had persistent access to the internal server, and the ability allowed them to periodically log in and collect pilfered data. So you've got point-of-sales malware, you've got island hopping from a web server. It's everything we've talked about on TechSNAP for 145 episodes. It's exactly the type of attack we've talked about by the letter.
If one person at the Target IG department had watched this show, they wouldn't have had this problem.
It's pretty amazing. And, you see how this is such a brilliant and poignant example of why completely unrelated systems can lead to compromising each other. So they got in through a web server, and then from a web server, they island hopped to some network that had these point-of-sales devices. Now, why weren't these properly isolated, et cetera?
Yeah, but you shouldn't have been able to get from where the web server is.
But it happens all the time.
Probably should have been in a DMZ.
Yep.
Into where the point of sales terminals are. I think part of the problem is that the point of sales terminals are they're treated like a device, right? It's something that some other manufacturer makes. We install, connect to the network, and that's it. We don't know what it runs. We don't look at it. Whatever.
Right. Well, and I have a local burger chain that I love going to. They've been clients of mine in the past, and all of their point of sales devices are running Windows XP embedded again. And what the thing is they reviewed several software packages designed for restaurants, and they all used XP. Okay, so and this is a problem as we now know. XP support ends at April? I mean, we could be seeing the very beginning of what's going to be an ongoing problem with these types of devices.
Right, but the XP support ending has no impact on these because it's not like they've been getting the Windows updates for the last 10 years as it is.
Good point. Yep.
Like I imagine most of these aren't even running Service Pack 2 or 3, whatever the really, really big service pack that made a difference for XP.
It doesn't matter. All we have to do is reboot them, and it wipes back to the ROM, and no changes are applied. It's fine. Of course, it doesn't reboot for 3 weeks, and so the entire time it runs malware, but it's fine.
Yeah, and they just make it persistent and reinfect it, right?
Yeah. It's pretty interesting that it sounds like they had persistent access for a while. I'm reading through the rest of it, and this is actually kind of what happened to 7-Eleven back in 2009, too. They had a SQL injection vulnerability on 7-Eleven's website, and the attacker got in via that and was able to get data off their point-of-sale systems. So, just an ongoing problem, I guess. Good write-up from Krebs. He's really been digging into this, and he's been trying to work with Target, but doesn't, based on his...
Well, it seems like he has sources for the people that are working with
Right,
Target.
but Target won't go on the record with this stuff. Oh.
Yep.
I guess that's not too surprising. All right, Alan, any other thoughts on that story?
No, that's about it for that one.
All right, well, then I'd like to thank Ting.com, sponsor of the TechSNAP program. Ting is mobile that makes sense. Ting is my mobile service provider. And here's a couple of great things. No contracts, no early termination fees, and you only pay for what you use. And every plan on Ting includes hotspot and tethering included with your plan, as well as caller ID, voicemail, and all that kind of stuff. And the awesome, amazing Ting dashboard that gives you full control of your cell phone experience. You get everything from a snapshot of what your usage is at right now, how many minutes and messages and megabytes, which is how Ting bills you. They just add those up at the end of the month, whatever bucket you fall into. That's what you pay. You don't pay into some large contract that you don't end up getting all the value out of. You only pay for what you need and for what you use. And that's awesome because, honestly, my voice minutes go through cycles where there's just times of the year I'm not using the phone a lot, and there's other times where I'm using a lot more. So it doesn't make sense to pay into a big contract that I'm not getting any value out of. And the thing is aside from all of that, Ting's dashboard is actually amazing. It's how every cell phone provider out there needs to do their web dashboards from now on. They're setting the bar here, and as somebody who just wants to be able to get in and configure something, that's extremely nice. And if you ever get stuck, they also have fantastic customer service. You can call Ting at 1-855-TING-FTW, and a real Canadian answers the phone between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. Eastern. That's the Allen time zone right there. Boy, yep. Alan, they're in Canada, they're in your time zone. It was like it was meant to be. They were meant to sponsor this show. It's so magical. But I'll give you a practical example of what's really great. So I got this Nexus 5 from the Google Play Store. I brought it over to Ting, and I got one of their SIM cards, and I've activated it. And this is awesome because I bought this directly from Google. I now have it on a service that I have no contract with. I have no early termination fee, and I'm only paying for what I use. But until I move to the new studio and actually have some staff that I need to give a phone to, I'm hanging on to my HTC One. Now, what's awesome is Ting actually totally changes the value structure on the lifetime of a cell phone. Because I'm only paying for what I use with this HTC One, there's no downside to me hanging on to it and then say when I went over to my mom's house this last weekend and I needed to get internet access for my kids because they were trying out something on the iPad, I fired up my HTC One, turned on the hotspot, which comes included with my Ting plan, and then I just simply paid for the data usage that we needed that night, which was minor, is no big deal. And then when I'm done, the HTC One goes back on my desk, and I don't feel guilty for paying into some sort of $60 contract or anything. I needed it for a couple of hours that night, and so I used it, and I just paid for what I used. And it totally makes something where you have, in the past, a contract. So when you get the new phone, you shut off the old phone, you put it in a drawer, you give it away, whatever you do, and you only use the new phone. But in this new model that Ting's pioneering, where you only pay for what you use, there's really no disadvantage to keeping your old phone and essentially getting more value out of it in the long run. Now, this is a hell of a hotspot. I mean, the HTC One is way overkill to be a hotspot, but in this case, it's what I needed at the time, and until I give this to somebody else,
it's what you had to
perfect.
Handy, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it saved the night, too. But, Ting does have dedicated devices that will be like a MiFi type device. They now have the Netgear Zing, which is a tri-band LTE wireless hotspot. Fits in your pocket, has a gorgeous LCD screen on there. It also supports 802.11n, which is actually, when you have a tri-band LTE device, you can saturate 802.11b and G, which sounds incredible. But so it's actually, not only do you get great signal and performance with N, and in a busy, crowded wireless space, sometimes having N can be very handy. But with tri-band LTE, you might actually need that N. That's what's so cool about this. It gives you your signal ratio, your battery power, all on the screen right here. If you go over to TechSNAP.ting.com, that'll apply a $25 discount. You can pick this up for $139, a tri-band LTE device that supports 802.11n, and you only pay for what you use. There's no contract, and there's no early termination fee. TechSNAP.ting.com. That'll bring it down to $139 for that device. They have a whole range of phones, including the HTC One. But every now and then I just look at this and I think, geez, the value here is absolutely incredible. They also have feature phones. You can get at $73. You can get this Samsung M400. $73 when you apply the TechSNAP.ting.com discount, and you own that phone outright, you have the service that you only pay for what you use, and there's no contract. And, of course, they've got a whole range of Android phones, Windows phones, you name it. They've got it over there at Ting. I love it. So go to techsnap.ting.com to get started. And a huge thank you to Ting for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. Don't forget, people love Ting. And your people, too.
Well, it's, the whole internet's kind of moving towards this kind of cloud pay-for-what-you-use model, right?
It is, yeah.
It's you can have as much as you need, and you only pay for the part that you use. And you can turn it on and off as you need, and, the flat fee, very small fee for each device or whatever.
Yep.
And that's working very well, and I'm very glad to see that starting to...
I know. And now it's like, okay, everybody else, catch up. Ting's been doing this for a while now, and you are seeing some of the other carriers start to try to emulate some of the things Ting does, but it ain't the same. All right, Alan, so our next story. From time to time, it seems like about once a month, we get a story about these controller systems that just doesn't sound good, does not leave a good, warm, fuzzy feeling. So what's going on this week?
So researchers from Russia have discovered more than 150 different zero-day flaws in various SCADA, ICS, and PLC
150
systems.
zero days?
Yeah.
Oh, boy. That's not good.
Yeah. The researchers have uncovered a huge number of zero-day flaws in the various SCADA systems, which stands for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. So that's the machines that attach to like industrial machinery and monitor it and control it.
Pumps, valves, things like that.
Yep. And, keep track of the temperature and graph it and all that kind of stuff, and turn it on and off. And those are industrial control systems that allow, and the zero-day flaws could allow an attacker to gain complete control over the system. And some of those systems run things like power grids, energy, chemical, transportation systems, infrastructure, etc. You can do things from opening and closing valves at a water pumping station or at an oil refinery, or changing the stoplights on the street.
Right.
Russian researchers spent more than a year investigating various ICS and SCADA systems used in everything from home solar panel installations to critical national infrastructure. The researchers were from Positive Research, and they detailed some vulnerabilities in the Siemens WinCC, which are the PLCs that were targeted by the Stuxnet virus. And they went on to look at a bunch of other stuff. They said, we don't have big experience in the nuclear industry, but for energy, oil and gas, chemical, and transportation sectors, during our assessment projects, we demonstrated to the owners on how they could get full control over the industrial infrastructure and what the risks of someone else doing that would be. So
they're basically cherry picking from a various range of 150 zero days. And in this demonstration, they just showed, well, here we go. Now we've completely owned this box.
This factory.
Yeah.
Or this oil refinery.
Yeah.
Or this stoplights or whatever.
That's going to be a great way for somebody to make money from some big oil company.
Yeah. Take the oil refinery hostage.
The ultimate hostage situation.
Yep. For the Stuxnet ones, they say the vulnerabilities existed in the way passwords were encrypted and stored in the software project database. If they're actually encrypted, that would be the problem right there.
Yeah.
Basically, cryptographic hashes or go home.
Yeah.
And allowed the attackers to get full access to the PLCs using attacks described as dangerous and easy to launch. The researchers published an updated version of the password cracking tool over at thc.org that targeted the vulnerabilities in the Siemens PLC S300 as part of their SCADA Strangelove project, which was presented at the Chaos Communication Conference in Berlin the other week.
Like Dr. Strangelove, I see.
So if you've never heard of it, THC Hydra is a little app. It's for like Linux and BSD, and I think there's a port for Windows. And, a Hydra is like a snake with a lot of heads. And basically what it's a brute forcing tool that works against almost every protocol you can think of. In the class I used to teach, we used it against SSH and, attack the SSH server and then make sure, set up, deny hosts or fail to ban or whatever to block the attack. Mm-hmm. But you can also have it attack, POP3, IMAP, MySQL, vBulletin forums, websites, and then now there's a patch for these attacking these PLCs.
I see.
So there's, I think, over 100 different protocols and applications you can throw Hydra against to password, just brute force attack it. And like a lot of these systems, these little embedded devices rarely ever have some kind of lockout system where they be like, oh, this guy's failed to log in 10 times. How about we not let him just keep trying 100 times a second for the rest of eternity until he gets in?
Some of these things are so old that if they did implement like it via update or something, I bet if they implemented some sort of system where we keep track of that, you could almost DDoS the box just by doing failed login attempts because they're super low power. They often have very minimal processors.
Most of the times the attack is what's going to be the denial of service, whereas if it actually had a lockout, it would mitigate it somewhat.
Yeah, that's true. The attack itself. Yeah.
Separate from that, the researchers also found more than 60,000 industrial control systems, mostly installed in homes that were directly exposed to the internet. You know, a quick search over at Shodan HQ and some Googling, and you've got 60,000 people's control systems that you can access over the internet without having to break into anything first and do some island hopping.
It actually doesn't surprise me.
Yep. Some of the most commonly exposed devices were from vendors like Tritium, NRG Systems, and Lantronix. You know, some of them you can find just for the search engine. You search, you know, the product version string that's printed at the bottom of the little, you know, web page that they present, and you can find things like the WinCube Solar Smart Grid System, IPC chips embedded devices, or the Lantronix SLS video capture platform. Right? We've talked about hijacking people's security systems before and watching and stuff like that.
You see that you see people leave their webcams or whatever you want to call them exposed to the net with public IPs all the time, and you know, every now and then you see somebody does a blog post. There's a great way you can voyeur yourself to heart's content by putting this search string into Google and look at all these cameras. And people do. They just post these baby monitors and whatnot right up on the net. They don't even think about it. I don't even know how it happens. It seems like it should be too hard to do that, but
yeah, because most people have a router, you'd have to like port forward, I guess, UPnP.
Oh yeah, maybe it's UPnP screwing people over. Yeah. Well, of course, go figure. So, Alan, are you concerned about this kind of stuff?
Yep.
Oh, well. Okay.
I'm glad I'm not responsible for any of it.
Yeah, I mean, so what is the answer here? Just slowly by time
put
replace
it on the internet.
Well, obviously, I know. I mean, that
like
is...
a lot of these, some of these things specifically only have a serial port, so they couldn't be connected to the internet.
Yeah.
And then some company comes up with a device that has a serial port and an Ethernet port and brings it out on the internet.
Look what I've done. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, now you can manage this factory from somewhere else.
Yeah.
It's like, great, but so can a random person.
So that's what drives it, and diagnostics and centralization.
Separate VPN, like separate VLANs that can only be VPN'd into with certificates. And you're just, you know.
But wouldn't that seem
protection against island hopping even?
But wouldn't that seem to indicate there is demand, regardless of whether you agree with it or not, there is demand to have these things internet connected? So then maybe, so if that's the case, then we have to come up with something that works in that scenario, right?
They need proper interface. Like, how hard is it to put it behind a VPN so that you can do strong authentication before you can ever get access to it?
Is this a case for more advanced operating systems, like BSDs and Linux-type operating systems on these devices?
Half of them are. Sadly, a lot of it is software that runs on top of Windows in an embedded computer.
And it's like a multitude of problems, right? It's like bad security practices.
But even if you embed
bad updates,
Linux in it or whatever,
you have to update it.
If you're not updating it, and then, you know, the problem is there's a risk that an update will break it.
Right. And when you're talking about something that opens and closes the cooling valve to some sort of centrifuge or whatever, you know, you don't really want to be borking that with a software update.
And that's why you need something that has long-term support where you know the updates aren't going to break things.
Yeah.
But, you know, it seems like if it's so critical that if it breaks, it's a big problem, there should be two of them, you know, redundancy. So you can upgrade one, and then if it doesn't work, you can roll it back and things like that.
That's a good point.
Like, when in the systems like NanoBSD or the one that Powell used on his Voodoo device, that auditing appliance we talked about, they're set up so they'll have 2 or 3 partitions. And so when you update the firmware, even though it's not firmware, it's a whole FreeBSD install or whatever, when you update it, you overwrite one of the 2 partitions, the one that wasn't being used. And then it reboots and uses the new one. And if it fails to boot or something goes wrong, it fails back to using the original one. Right? So you always have the one you're using and the old one. And when you update, you replace the old one, and then you boot off of it. And if it doesn't work, you go back to the original one that was working, right? So that you can always roll back. It seems like a simple system like that would allow them to install updates on it.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. You know who's kind of solved this a little bit is the Mars rover. Heather and I talk about this all the time on SciByte. When they do a remote software update to the Mars rover, obviously if something goes wrong, there's nothing they can do. So they have a redundant A/B computer system that does sanity checks on each other. And they have actually had a software update that went bad. It borked the operating system on the Mars rover, and they switched over.
Watchdog times out, and it flips over to the other one.
And they had a core like default computer that was like as the image it was when they launched it from the ground. That ran the thing for a couple of days, got them back up and running, communicating back with NASA, and then they were able to fix
so that they could upload even newer software.
Yep.
Exactly.
That's happening now.
It's there's similar systems. There was a presentation at BSDCan last year, like 2013, about the way the internet systems work up in far, far northern Canada, where there'll be like a satellite downlink station and there's like a village for about a mile around it. And, you know, when one of those computers there breaks, it can be 2 or 3 months before a technician can manage to get up there with the spare parts to fix it. Mm-hmm. And so they have 3 computers and they all check each other and fail over. They're just using FreeBSD with jails and cross-mounting each other and stuff, so that if something goes wrong, they can just use one of the other ones.
Yeah. There's a lot of problems with these SCADA systems, too, because a lot of times...
And, you know, so if you're installing something like a smart grid system that manages your solar panel or something at your house, you need to make sure that's not directly exposed to the internet if it doesn't need to be. Like, I understand most people aren't like me and have separate VLANs for things at their house. You know, I have a management VLAN for stuff like... that's where I would put stuff like this smart grid controller if I had one, or it's where, you know, how I connect to the IPMI systems on the servers and my switch and the PDU that I use to turn servers on and off in my basement, all of that. But, you know, you can easily separate stuff so that it doesn't get exposed directly to the internet.
Mm-hmm. Well said, Alan. All right. Well, why don't we take a quick break right here and thank our second sponsor this week, and that, my friends, is GoDaddy.com, longtime sponsor of the TechSNAP program, and they got a brand new deal, 30% off anything you want to grab over at GoDaddy.com when you use the promo code 30deal7. Now, that could be domains, that could be hosting. You know, something I want to...
Does it work for renewals?
I don't know if that's considered a new product.
Oh, because it does say new product?
Yeah.
Then no, it doesn't.
Yeah. But here's something I might suggest. So WordPress is awesome. There's a lot of things you can do with it. And GoDaddy has recently revamped their WordPress hosting. They've built it from the ground up to be really fast and really secure. They have 99.9% uptime guarantees with their WordPress hosting, and they're also going to manage the security and performance for you. They have a managed WordPress offering that's built from the ground up for maximum performance with load-balanced servers, advanced tools, and personal tweaks from their WordPress experts that you're not going to find anywhere else. It all adds up to blistering speed and a guaranteed 99.9% uptime. And you can get started for an incredibly low price of $6.29 a month. And don't forget, if you use our promo code 30deal7, you're going to get 30% off that first purchase of it. They have award-winning security at this point. I mean, look at this. GoDaddy's been around for so long now. They have got this nailed. They have got WordPress hosting figured out. And I think you should go check it out now. That's one of many things you could use our 30% off deal for. Perhaps it'd be a domain. It could, you know what? Get a .tv. I'm not going to judge. If you want to use .tv, have at it, Haas. Just go over to GoDaddy.com. Yeah, I know. So do I. JBLive.tv. I just like making fun.
Now.tv.
Yeah. So there's lots of good uses for the .tv or the .ams or the FMs or the coms or the nets or the orgs. I don't know about those govs. So go over to GoDaddy.com and use the promo code 30deal7 when you're shopping over at GoDaddy. And a big thank you to GoDaddy for sponsoring the TechSNAP show. And thanks to you guys for taking advantage of those codes. 30% off. That's nothing to sneeze at, folks. Again, 30deal7. All one word, 30deal7 when you check out over at GoDaddy.com. Okay, Alan. Well, did we have any other news stories we wanted to cover?
Nope, that's it for the news.
Wedded good, so wedded good. All right, well, then you know what that means. It's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails to TechSNAP at JupiterBroadcasting.com or popping that contact link at the top of our website, or even better, starting a thread in our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. And Alan, we got a couple of emails on this subject over the last couple of weeks, but Nick wrote in with a great one. We touched on it, I think back during our holiday break where we recorded 2 episodes on a team password manager, something for like a business or a group of people working together that needed to share passwords. Nick wrote in and he says, hey guys, big fan of TechSNAP and Jupiter Broadcasting. I pretty much started watching you soon after you guys started, and it's always great info. Anyways, last episode you guys spoke about managing passwords with a shared KeyPass and other options. For the last year or so, I've been using an application called TeamPass at teampass.net. It's great for a workplace as you can limit exactly what people can see and even run reports on what they have seen for when they leave the organization. It can run on pretty much any Apache server and can even authenticate with Active Directory or LDAP if you want to. And of course, it's open source, which is always a great kicker. I'm going to have to check this out. He also,
that does seem pretty interesting.
He blogged about it at his blog, friendlysysadmin.com, which will have a link to his email if you guys want to kind of see how he implemented it.
That's exactly. I have a friend whose blog is like hostile admin. So it's interesting to have the guy claiming to be the opposite.
He also wanted to point, he says, I've never heard you guys mention rack tables. This is, he says, also on my blog, if you want to read about it, it's used to manage your data center ports and mappings of IPs, etc. It's called rack tables, which might be useful to some folks, which he also has written up at friendlysysadmin.com. So the password tool he's talking about again is TeamPass. Man, I think that might be a good last how-to.
Yeah, and it's open source, so we can look into it and make sure it's all goody.
I'm bookmarking this right now. It looks, well, I'm not going to say how. I mean, first glance on their website, I'm not overly impressed, but I'll take it.
Well, it's open source. What do you expect?
I'll take it. Yeah, I mean, beggars can't be choosers, right?
Do they have a picture?
I was looking for a screenshot. Yeah,
of a demo.
I mean, it sounds like it's a web app, which is kind of cool.
Demo is actually not available.
Yeah, here's the source. Here's the GitHub and SourceForge page. So it's out there. Oh, they have a Facebook page too. Well, holy crap! Yeah, there you go. It's GPL. It looks like. Very good. Very good. Oh, here's some screenshots on their SourceForge page. Oh yeah, this is not bad at all. So it just basically has a directory tree structure where you can stash stuff. And then you have it honestly looks a little bit like a LastPass web version, a little bit. So that's totally usable. And I like that it runs reports too. So there you go, TeamPass. It used to be called CPassman. Does that ring a bell at all?
Nope.
Doesn't for me either. But all right, well, we got a ZFS question for you, Alan. It comes in from Simon. He says, hey guys. At work, our hosting server rsyncs over 2 million tiny files to a remote ZFS server. The rsync job takes about 1 minute to sync our extended 4 server, but 30 minutes to sync our ZFS server. The reason it's so slow is rsync stalls while checking file sizes and M times for the 2 million files. The hard drive is working full load while this process happens, even when nothing has changed. Why is the rsync checking process so slow on ZFS compared to Extended 4? A few episodes ago, Alan mentioned you could tune ZFS so all the metadata is stored in the ARC, which may help, but I can't find any documentation on this. Our ZFS server has 16 gigabytes of RAM, and just using the default ZFS options, and also compression, dedupe, and 8 times are all turned off. Any recommendations? Love the show.
Like, is he doing it over the network? Because 2 million files in 1 minute over the network doesn't seem possible.
Yeah, that does seem really fast.
Like, it just, you can't send the commands back and forth fast enough.
Well, and rsync has to check all the files before it knows which ones to remove.
But if you're comparing, doing it over locally versus doing it over the network, then that's what's making the 30 minutes happen, less ZFS.
Is it possible... Is it possible Extended 4 file system caches?
ZFS caches better than ext4.
So what do you figure?
Yeah.
It's got to be checking the attributes.
We need more detail on what it is how the setup is.
It says to a remote ZFS server, but it doesn't say the remote Extended 4 server.
If that's not remote, the difference there is the remoteness, not the...
So he says, he does say to sync to our Extended 4 server, which makes it sound like he is going to another box.
Yeah, well, if it's going over the network, 1 minute doesn't seem likely for checking 2 million files.
Yeah.
Because that would mean each check would have to take 1/2 millionth of a minute.
And especially if it's like the same rsync commands and everything.
Yeah. So ZFS will by default cache metadata already, but it limits the amount of the arc that can be taken up by metadata to 1/4 of the RAM, if I'm not mistaken. And there's on FreeBSD anyway, there's a sysctl that controls that. It's called vfs.zfs .arc_meta_limit. And that limits how many gigabytes of the arc are allowed to be used for metadata.
Okay.
And on one of my servers that has like 15 million files, I've changed that to be 3/4 of the maximum of the arc size rather than 1/4.
Okay.
Since they're all really small files and it's more important to be able to scan the directory really quick and have the metadata than it is to actually...
Could it be something crazy like because there's a limit, maybe ZFS goes up to that limit and stops there and Extended 4 just eats as much RAM, there's like no control to it, so it just dumps all of it into RAM and then it...
Possibly.
That's weird, though.
And it depends how much RAM the Extended 4 system has and what else is running on it.
And what the drives are, the controllers.
It'd be interesting to see, what ZFS-stats said about the ZFS server and what it was using. Like, it'll break down how much of it's being used for metadata versus actual data and things like that. And, using Zmon to see what the cache hit ratios are like on the metadata.
Okay. That's good stuff. Well, let us know. Let us know if you, Simon, if you get...
but it seems like there might be other things that are making it look like it's ZFS's fault when it's not. And it could also come down to how the file system's laid out across the disks and stuff.
Yeah, and if the Extended 4 disks are like 10,000 RPM and the ZFS are 72, I mean, there's like all of these weird variables.
Well, also, it might have to do with if rsync tries to do like an fsync at the end of each file.
Or if in one
but
on
it's
one
not
box
changing
is
the files.
checksumming.
It's not changing the file.
No, it's just moving. Yeah, just moving the
It depends what it's doing. There's a couple of flags you might be able to add to rsync to make it only compare like the time on the file rather than some of the other stuff.
Right.
Or only compare the size, depending on what you're looking at.
Right.
And to see if you can just use those options to find out which parameter it is that's making it slow, if that is what's making a difference.
Mm-hmm. All right, Beatty Man, which I'm just going to assume stands for Batman. He writes, and then he says, Chris and Alan, great show. Big fan of all of the shows you broadcast. I work for an architectural office, and we rely on a server edition of AutoCAD, so moving to an operating system other than Windows is... we rely on a server edition of AutoCAD, so moving to an operating system other than Windows is feasible. We currently have XP machines, and with support ending in April, it's part of my job as a multitask employee, as a project manager, IT, etc., to support our next, or to suggest our next move. Being we are a small firm and money is a big part of this suggestion, I would like to move to a Linux-based system, i.e. Ubuntu, at least to start, and then I will either convince those in the power to stick with it, or at least give them time to purchase new machines over the span of some time. So he's talking desktops here. My question, I have managed our machines from the server using Active Directory, group policy, etc. As you know, control of folder restrictions, redirections, folder shares, etc. is pretty easy to manage with Active Directory. Is there a way that a similar ability can be handled with Linux desktops? I'm open-minded and willing to run a Linux server just for this task and move from AD to LDAP if needed. Granted, I will have to do some research as I've never done that, but I have several years in Linux and I can catch up pretty quickly. Keep up the good work. So centrally managing any kind of Unix workstation, where do you start, Alan?
Yeah, I use Puppet and just apply the same configuration to every machine kind of by hand instead of with Active Directory per se.
Right.
It's actually very similar to Active Directory when you think about it, right? Each client machine calls into the server and is like, hey, what should my policy be? And the policy is, make sure you have this line in that file. And then for folder redirection, that could be, an NFS mount of, in each user's home directory or some common place. So maybe one common place on each desktop, there's an NFS mount of your projects folder or whatever. And then each user's home directory has a symbolic link to that. So it shows up on their desktop as projects. And they can just double click it and it opens up the project folder on the file server or whatever.
Silver51 in our chat room is recommending Zental, which is a Linux small business server, and they call it a drop-in replacement for Microsoft Small Business Server. Get you Exchange and all of that Active Directory functions. They say in 30 minutes.
Because single sign-on like that is very handy, whether that's emulating Active Directory with SAM before and some appliance, or doing it with LDAP.
Yeah, I would even...
I've done it once before with LDAP.
Or you could just use WinBind. You could just continue to authenticate to Active Directory using WinBind, and you can go into your Linux machine and set up the PAM configuration so that WinBind is one of the default authentication modules, and then it'll just check that once you've joined the directory. The other thing I was going to suggest, depending on how much control you need and how standardized, one of the things I've done in the past for a library deployment of Linux desktops is GDM, and I assume KDM as well, support. That's the display manager. When you log in, you get the login screen. They support pre and post login scripts, and so a lot of times what I would have the student machines do is when they would log out, a series of scripts would run in the background that would copy over the most recent versions of files and shortcuts from the master server. So it would just do an SSH rsync those files over, clean up the directories, and set everything the way it should be. So the next time somebody logged in, essentially all of these scripts had ran in the background, so it was a new, fresh experience every time. That way, if some student put a picture of a dick on the background, right, the next time the next kid logs in, it's gone. And you could kind of accomplish the same thing. You could even just push stuff out to like the Etsy skeleton directory, and there's a lot of ways, because you can write files directly to the file system on these Linux boxes. You can push out configs that way. Yeah, there's a lot of ways you can manage that.
The advantage of something like Puppet is that it's a manifest. So rather than just blindly copying files, you can be like, this should look like this, and if it doesn't, take what steps are necessary to make it look like that.
Right, and it's much easier to manage it, especially if you have several machines.
Make sure that GDM service is running. So if it's not running, start it. And if it doesn't start, then issue an alert. And
like Nexus is pointing out in our IRC chat room, if you do something like a WinBind authentication, make sure you've got a good, secure, standard local account you can log in on those machines in case.
When it doesn't work,
because it eventually won't work. That's happened to me, and that was a lesson that I learned the hard way.
Or even using like NIS, that's the same problem.
Yep. So Zentyal, which is available at zentyal.org, might be worth a look, because it might be able to just do a drop-in for your current Windows box.
And it sounds like they're using the Server Edition AutoCAD, so they'll be keeping a Windows server anyway.
Yeah.
So using WinBind would let you just keep using that Windows server. Or like you said, that appliance would let them get rid of the Windows if they don't need it.
I think what BDman is doing right now, I think a lot of people who are going to be reevaluating, well, I don't need new hardware. Performance-wise, this computer we bought the secretary 3 years ago is fast enough, right? She uses
the one you bought 10 years ago that's running Windows XP now. If it still works, it still works.
For a lot of people, like if what they do every day hasn't changed significantly, that computer is still doing just as good of a job. It's just the operating system is getting old. And so I think a lot of people will be looking at these types of deployments. So BDman, you are a pioneer. You are in an area that's about to get a lot more crowded. All right, Joshua writes in. He says, hey, Chris and Alan. I'm the author of the BitTorrent Sync and SAB NZB Sickbeard Couch Potato, etc. suite of plugins for FreeNAS. Okay,
cool.
Let's stop right there. This man is a miracle creator. Sickbeard, SAB NZB, and Couch Potato are worth the price of a FreeNAS mini box right there. Those things alone make it worth the base price alone. So hats off to this guy. Joshua, you are awesome. He includes a link to the forum post where he talks about a new update he just released to the BitTorrent Sync plugin. BitTorrent Sync may also be an answer to a question last week on how to keep two FreeNAS boxes in sync. It's not going to be bit-by-bit synced like a ZFS replicant, but it will be almost real-time. You can specify a predefined host and port forward your servers to not rely on BitTorrent's relay tracker servers at all. This is actually something I have done here in the studio.
The big advantage there is that the second box doesn't have to be a FreeNAS.
Right.
If you don't have yet another box that you can dedicate to being FreeNAS,
now you
can run BitTorrent Sync on any
It can get tricky because I have since learned that BitTorrent Sync creates a torrent file for every file, right? And so it has to checksum all those.
Say 15 million tiny files like I do, it's only like 40 or 50 gigs of space, but it's a lot of tiny files.
Right. So you take Angela's iPhoto library, 500 gigabytes or whatever it is of storage. Well, I had the brilliant idea, put BitTorrent Sync on the FreeNAS box, put BitTorrent Sync on her Mac. Every time Angela adds a photo to iPhoto, it immediately syncs over to the BitTorrent Sync server. It works really, really well, but it also means that the FreeNAS box was constantly doing checksums on those files, because by the time it got through all of the files, the time window had expired and it was time to start over again and recheck to see if there's any new files to pull over. So that can get a little tricky, but if you're not doing thousands or millions of files, BitTorrent Sync is unbelievably fast. I use it currently for audio production, where I will edit an audio file during Unfilter. I will clip something, save it, and it will be immediately available on the soundboard computer instantaneously, faster than I could copy it over the network, and I can play it almost by the moment I hit save. It's really incredible, and it's all happening locally. It doesn't even have to talk to any remote servers. So, Joshua, great work on those plugins. Thank you very much. I use them, and they actually help in the production of the Jupiter Broadcasting shows. So, and he put a link to more information, which I have linked in L show notes. Alan, there you go. That's our emails for this week. We got a few other ones, but I tried to respond to people directly, or a couple other ones required additional investigation, so they're on the to-do list. But if you'd like to get a hold of the TechSNAP program, go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com, click the contact link at the top of our website, and then choose TechSNAP from the drop-down, and then just fill out whatever you'd like. Send that into the show. It gets flagged to both Alan and I. Or you can also start a thread in our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. And then the community full of smart individuals can help chime in and maybe get you an answer even faster than Alan and I can. But Alan, with the feedback all done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. Welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that didn't quite fit at the top of the show, but we still want to talk about them and give you some links to follow up on your own after the show. And some of these links came from our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. Alan, you probably could have predicted this one was coming. Microsoft has announced they're extending anti-malware support for Windows XP into 2015. Now, not patches.
Yeah, this story confuses me to no end. So they're like, we're not going to support Windows XP, so no phone support or anything like that. And we're going to stop doing updates to Windows XP, so no more security fixes.
Right.
But we're going to keep making the anti-malware software work on XP.
The anti-malware software that's balls that nobody should be using, by the way, too. It's not
but it's like, so when I first saw this story, I'm like, oh, all those guys that had all those 0 days for Windows XP and were just waiting for the April 1st today are going to be so mad. Because they're gonna. It's like now we have to wait like another year, 15 months, and then it's like, oh, never mind. No, they don't. There's still going to be an apocalypse in April.
Yeah. Well, we need to come up with a good name for it. XP apocalypse. I don't know. What was XP's code name when it was a product? That might be a good. I
don't remember actually.
Yeah. Last Windows product code name I remember is Chicago.
Yeah, that was Windows 95.
Yeah.
Well, I guess there was like Longhorn.
Yeah, Longhorn
got canceled, and that's kind of what
Vista.
Windows 7. Yeah. Well, no, Vista was like, oh, we canceled Longhorn.
Yeah,
and 7 was like, well, here we got one or two of the things out, maybe.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, when Microsoft being useless.
Yeah. All right.
Next story.
BitTorrent Sync's creator has a new software that he's called Dissonant X. That's a great name.
So Bram Cohen has created a new steganography system called Dissonant X, and the idea is that you can hide your secret message inside a regular file. And basically, the way my understanding of how it works is it's you take a text document or something, and by randomly adding spaces and commas and periods and taking out bits and things like that, you make the hash of a section of it match up with the desired value, and so that makes. And that's the encrypted text is actually the hash of this section. So you can just, by breaking the file up into blocks, you can get a bunch of these hashes. And then if you have the proper decryption key, those strings decrypt into the original message.
That's awesome.
And so unlike, trying to hide it in a JPEG file or something, it's a lot harder to detect. And some of the steganography can be detected because of the changes you make are fairly obvious. And so one of the ones they're looking at is just by removing sentences from, send a copy of Pride and Prejudice or whatever, and by removing a bunch of pieces of it, you're actually encoding the secret message.
What do you think, Alan, of XPoGeddon? XPoGeddon, and by the way, the code name was Whistler for Windows XP.
That one. Okay.
Yeah.
Was it?
Yeah, okay. It was Whistler. The chat room has solved the mystery.
Way to jump backwards in the timeline.
I'm sorry.
Excuse me for a few seconds.
I'm sorry.
XPoGeddon, I do not like that. No, that doesn't work at all.
Okay. What about XPocalypse Now?
No.
Okay.
I'm thinking like XP Doomsday or something.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, great on
the end of the internet.
Great to see the BitTorrent creator still making awesome and relevant software. This one really upsets me. Total go figure. And it's actually totally the FCC's fault. Federal court has struck down the FCC's net neutrality rules that applied to wired broadband. And this was the ruling that came back in 2010 that essentially said, have at it, Haas, with wireless, but when it comes to wired broadband, you got to give everybody equal and the same access to the pipes. Verizon fought this, and over the years has finally won.
Bought off enough people.
Yeah, and you know what it really sucks is this is coming at the time where have you heard of AT&T's new offering called sponsored data? Have you heard of this?
No.
They will pay for the user's bandwidth fee. So it's not that they're making Amazon or Netflix pay to get special access, but what they're saying is if you pay us, then you cover their data fees. And so essentially the way it works is you could have like Amazon who's sponsoring for your data, and then sites like Jupiter Broadcasting who couldn't afford to do that. So you have to pay for your data when you use JB, but you don't have to pay for your data when you use Amazon. So AT&T is rolling this out right now. Verizon, now has essentially the go-ahead to say, manage the network in any way you want. If you want to dial Netflix down, and here I kind of see Verizon's point in a sense because here in my town, I pay for 50 up, 50 down, and I'm getting half of that right now because of network congestion issues in my state.
Well, see, if it's constricting your upload, it has nothing to do with Netflix.
That's true.
And, if your ISP has too much Netflix traffic, they can apply to become part of OpenConnect and get a free copy of Netflix to put in their head end.
I know.
So
this is a major... So what happened?
My biggest problem with sponsored data is the amount of analysis AT&T is doing of your traffic to decide what traffic is sponsored and what isn't.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, they don't really have the BGP data going all the way out to your house to know that this traffic should be counted and this one shouldn't and stuff. It gets really fuzzy really fast.
We dug into the mistake that the FCC made back in 2010 that eventually led to Verizon's winnings here. It turns out to be essentially the last FCC chairman didn't have the political will to do this properly, and now we're all paying greatly for that. So in Unfiltered 81, Neutered Net Neutrality, we dug into the mistakes the FCC made back then, and now what sort of is going to have to happen before we have any kind of net neutrality ruling move forward. It's pain, and this is the kind of thing we didn't want to see happen, to be honest with you.
Exactly.
However, there is a silver lining in all of this, and we go into more detail on Unfiltered 81, but what essentially it is that the judge did rule that the FCC does actually have the authority to regulate broadband.
Actually do this.
Right? Yeah. Okay. So now what's going to happen in that regard, we don't know yet. So, yeah. All right, Alan.
I'm kind of glad that if everything goes to plan, I'll be my own ISP, and they won't be able to mess with my stuff.
There you go, Alan. That's how you solve it right there. Problem solved. All right, well...
Only costs twice as much as my mortgage every month, but...
Wow. Jeez.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so how the FreeBSD VFS layer works and an introduction to file systems.
Yeah. So this is a great blog post over at Hybrid Cluster. We interviewed them for BSD Now recently, but we haven't used the interview yet. So in a couple of weeks, there'll be an episode of BSD Now that we talk about their product. But one of their guys who basically works on integrating ZFS with FreeBSD wrote this great blog post that just kind of explains how file systems actually work and how applications interface with the operating system, which interfaces with the file system driver, and then eventually to the disk, and how that whole thing works, and why there's a directory called dot and a directory called dot and stuff like that.
Awesome. That's a great read. Thanks, Alan. Find a link to that in the roundup section of the show notes. All right, well, this one probably doesn't surprise you too much. Turns out Amazon is a hornet's nest of malware, as the Washington Post put it, and you can probably guess why. AWS.
Right. The fact that you can spin up a server for a couple of hours and then have it disappear, or spin it up and down and move its IP address all over the place, makes it very handy for that. Whereas a regular dedicated server, you rent it a month at a time, and it's a lot harder to move it around and not have it get taken down.
This convenience puts Amazon as the #1 hosting provider on the web for malware. Also puts them in position number 3 in the list as well, and position number 5, and then one of the last positions on the list too.
Right, I guess because some of it's in S3 and some of it's on EC2 and so on and so on.
There you go. Now you know why the CIA wants in.
Yeah, well, as someone who's been the target of a denial of service attack started from Amazon before, their support response isn't that great. They're like, oh, well, they're not attacking you anymore, so problem solved. It's like, well, they did, and you probably will find out who it was and suspend their account, and it was probably stolen credit card or a hacked account, and
they're also
they're making it so it doesn't happen tomorrow.
Well, and don't they want to take that load off their network? I mean, it's using up their bandwidth and processor.
Well, the other thing is they have the free tier, right? It's like, give us a credit card, and we won't charge you anything, and you can use it for a year for free. And, you're allowed basically exactly enough time to leave one machine running 24/7. But you could instead run 30 machines for one day.
I love this picture you got. How the news always gets it wrong. So this is a newscaster who's claiming this is a USB cord when it's actually an Ethernet cord?
Because there was a story about the NSA using USB cables that had,
little
spyware
implants,
built hardware in it so it could record what was going back and forth or whatever. And he's holding up an Ethernet cable and be like, this USB cable, blah, 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 blah.
If you see it, unplug it. It's the NSA.
Yeah, unplug that and your internet won't work anymore because that's an Ethernet cable.
And by the way, that's on NBC's Today Show.
Yeah.
Now, okay, we're not, yes, they can't expect them to get all these things wrong, but then at the same time, some of these people make hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars a year. You think they could get some of these details.
My mother knows the difference between a USB cable.
Nobody on set picked that up and said, hey, before you go on air, here's a USB cable.
And give me back that Ethernet cable. Where did you steal this from?
And I like to picture like people at home like, well, I have one of those in my computer. Now they can't get on the internet.
Yeah.
So we talked semi-recently about...
And then they call up their support, and the support's like, well, you have to plug... And they're like, no, NSA, no, I can't plug that cable back in.
We talked recently about TrueCrypt getting audited and how that was a good thing. Well, in that same vein, InkFS was... there was a company that was hired to do a 10-hour audit on InkFS, and they shared their results on the InkFS mailing list.
That seems like a short audit, but...
Yeah.
With the amount of stuff they found in just 10 hours, it's also not encouraging.
Yeah, so the result summary is the audit finds that InkFS is not up to speed with modern cryptography practices. Several previously known vulnerabilities have been reported, which have not been completely fixed, and new issues were also discovered during the audit. So they go in to talk about, they range the severity from 1 to 10, and they say some of these are not necessarily confirmed because of the limited time. They're proof of concept, kind of like what you were touching on.
Right, they didn't go all through the whole thing. They just said, it looks like this code is not doing what they think it is, or it is doing something that's known to be wrong.
Yeah, so if you are dependent on an encrypted FS deployment, it's probably worth your time to read through this report, especially if you have it on a production system.
And Gelly for the win. NKFS uses the same key for encrypting the data as it does for computing the MAC. So the MAC is basically a cryptographic hash so that you can prove the encrypted version of the file wasn't tampered with, so that the attacker can't make the encrypted version something that might break the encryption or compromise the system, or B, just modify your files without you knowing. So they're using the same key for both of those, and you're supposed to use a different key for each, so that because you check the MAC before you decrypt the data, so that you're not feeding data that might be bad into your decryption system.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're using the same key, then that doesn't work so well.
Right.
They're also using a stream cipher in places where they're supposed to use a block cipher. There's a bunch of shuffle bytes and flipping the bits and stuff, and it's like, as far as I can tell, this provides no useful security benefit and is relied upon to prevent the attacks from one of the other vulnerabilities, and it's just security by obscurity, not actually helping.
Ouch. That's not what you want to hear.
Generating the block initialization vector by XORing the block number and then adding 1 means that in a file that's only 2 blocks, the IV is the same for the first block and the second block because they both XOR out to 1 after you add 1. Which is bad.
Yes.
Another one, file holes. So the encryption knows if there's a giant chunk that's all zeros, don't encrypt it because that would waste time. But they're not verifying the MAC on that all zeros part. So someone could just add a bunch of zeros to the end of the file, corrupt it, and the MAC would say that the file hadn't been modified. And the MACs aren't compared in constant time. They're only using 64-bit MACs instead of 128. You can just edit a config file and disable the creation of the Macs and the reading back of the Macs that are already there. So you need to reevaluate the way they're using Macs and come up with a more robust system and add a command line option that make it not work if the Macs were disabled.
This is not sounding good, Alan.
Yeah. And then there's padding, Oracle, chosen ciphertext attacks, possible out-of-bound writes in certain things, using only 64-bit initialization vectors when it probably should be higher. And so in conclusion, NCFS is a useful tool. It ignores many standard best practices and largely due to its old age, right? It was originally developed in 2005 and a lot has been learned since then. Still being used today, and the authors need to make some improvements.
Next story on the roundup, you have an interview here with P.W. Singer, who advises people on what you need to know about today's cyber threats. What is this?
So it kind of just talks about, the Target hack and a bunch of similar ones, and just trying to dispel some of the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and make people understand what they have to think about
in practical
protecting
terms.
themselves online. Yeah, and just practical things you can do to protect yourself without, stop using credit cards and things like that some people are trying to propose.
That was on NPR, and we have a link to that interview in the show notes. Okay. All right. Well, so this has been a story that I wasn't sure. I thought maybe at first was a joke, where there is this call to, and the quote of the headline is "crack down on open source web browsers." How ridiculous!
So this story might partly be a misunderstanding and stuff, and it's funny. All right, so there's this Irish politician, and he called for an investigation and banning of open source web browsers because they allow users to remain anonymous and go online and go to a black market and buy drugs and things. And it's all quite ludicrous. Part of it seems that he might have actually meant Tor. He heard of the Tor browser bundle thing that uses Firefox.
Oh, that's
and
open
he blamed
source.
the whole thing on Firefox.
Yeah, okay.
When he actually meant to blame it on Tor, which is still open source, but not the same thing. And the funny part is his political party had this webpage about it. And they've since taken that down. It's now 404. So all the news articles linked to, they lost the link to what he actually, the proof that he said it right on there on his website or whatever. But yeah, it's Patrick O'Donovan from Limerick in Ireland.
Yeah.
Is an online black market is operating which protects the user's anonymity and operates across borders through the use of open source internet browsers and payment systems which allow users to remain anonymous. So it sounds like he's talking about Tor and Bitcoin, not Firefox per se. This effectively operates as an online supermarket for illegal goods such as drugs, weapons, and pornography, which is where it is extremely difficult to trace the identity of the buyers. We need a national and international response to clamp down on this illicit trade.
Oh, jeez. Oh, he doesn't understand, Alan. He doesn't understand.
Yeah, it seems like, he has no clue what he's talking about.
So have you ever...
Sounds like he's mostly talking about Silk Road, which has been gone for a while.
So. Right. Have you ever wondered how exactly it is they lay underground cables? Or I'm sorry,
this is under
ocean,
cables.
Yeah, under the sea. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. This is a really cool little GIF that explains it very straightforwardly.
GIF, not a GIF, but okay.
I know. Well, come on, really? I mean, come on.
Yes.
It's horrible. It's horrible, Alan. It's pretty neat, and it shows how they start at land, and then they kind of drop these things down, and then they have this little machine that they send down there to sort of trench it as the boat goes along, and then they go to a spot that has a buoy, and then they sort of rinse and repeat. It's pretty neat. Boy, that's got to be tedious and hard
and expensive.
But boy, am I thankful they do it.
Yep.
That's good work right there, Alan. That is good work right there. Okay, next story in the roundup, which is what? The Xbox support Twitter account was hacked. Hacker claims it was because of a hilariously bad password.
Yes.
I love it.
Apparently, the Microsoft employee changed their password from Microsoft 1 to Microsoft 2. And when it was time to rotate their password or whatever.
No.
And the Syrian Electronic Army got in pretty quickly.
No.
And they have basically been rampaging all over Microsoft lately. We heard they hit Skype, then Xbox. They've also hit the TechNet blog.
Right.
And
Didn't they also tweet out
Twitter accounts?
Yeah, they tweeted out. They tweeted out like, "Don't use Hotmail. We copy everything and send it to the NSA from like an official Microsoft account."
Yeah, the Skype one, I think.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah, that's super embarrassing. Oh, Xbox support with a password of Microsoft 1 and then Microsoft 2. That's unbelievable. Yeah. I mean, that's something I would have tried.
Exactly.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's like you don't even need Hydra to brute force it. You can just guess.
Now, Alan, I'm not sure if you can comment on this next story because maybe it applies to you, but a Canadian spy manual reveals how new recruits are supposed to conceal their identities. What do you think, Alan? Is this maybe... Are you trying to tell us something?
No. So the Globe and Mail, which is a big newspaper over here, did like a Freedom of Information request, or what the equivalent is in Canada, and got a slightly redacted version of this basically PowerPoint slideshow that new employees at the Communications Security Establishment of Canada, or CSEC, which is basically the Canadian version of the NSA, is a manual they give to new recruits. And it kind of explains the do's and don'ts and how they're supposed to deal with interacting with people.
When they say do, beware of threats from foreign intelligence services, I wonder if they mean the NSA. Do keep classified documents covered or hidden from view. That's a good one. Ensure you use proper encryption capabilities when sending messages. That's a good one. Leave your CSEC, CSIS, NSA, DND, etc. memorabilia back at home when traveling. Some of these are pretty obvious.
Yeah, it's like, don't advertise that you work for an intelligence agency.
Right, yeah. Don't, if crossing the U.S. border, be reluctant to say that you're attending work-related meetings with counterparts at Fort Meade. Don't be reluctant. It says be reluctant.
I'm not sure if they mean you should tell the border guard that, or that you should flaunt it in order to get through security faster without having your stuff searched.
It says don't, if crossing the U.S. border, be reluctant.
It says don't be reluctant to do it, so it's like a double negative. It's very confusing.
Yeah. I think if I was crossing the U.S. border and I was Canadian
don't wear your CSEC T-shirt or ball cap to a church.
That's a good one. I thought this was interesting. Don't bring in personal storage devices, and they list a cell phone as one of those things.
Yes, you're not allowed to bring in any electronic storage. But that, like here, you're not even allowed to bring that in if you work at a bank. It's like no MP3 players, nothing with USB storage, nothing.
Yeah.
No stealing information.
So now, with this handbook, I think I'm ready to be a spy.
Yep.
Oh, interesting. They have a little history on here, too. Huh.
Yes. Back in 1925, when they started working with the British to do intercept operations off British Columbia, down through when...
2001.
Yep.
I'm glad to see that other intelligence agencies were also able to capitalize on the events of September 11th. That's good. Yep. Everybody's budgets went up. Well, that's a great list, and it's a good read. If you guys, that's a good one to throw to like an Instapaper or a Pocket, and then just bust it out and read when you're killing some time, because it'll make you smile. Yep. We have all of the things we just blasted right through, linked in the roundup section of our show notes, as well as links to everything else we talked about in the show notes. Just go to jupiterbroadcasting.com and look for TechSNAP 145. Right there, you'll find RSS links to subscribe, get this show weekly. Yep. You'll find links to things we talked about, and direct download links to store it in your own personal FreeNAS box or wherever you want to store it forever.
Yep.
Forever and never. All right, Alan, is there anything else we want to cover before we run?
No, that's it for this week.
Okay, everybody. Well, thank you so much for tuning this week's episode of TechSNAP. Don't forget, we want to see you live over at jblive.tv, which is live at 1 p.m. Pacific, and that works out to be
4 p.m. Eastern, 2100 UTC.
Pow! That's right. And also jblive.info for the audio version, which you can listen to on the go or at your desk, whatever. No judgments. No judgments. Mm-hmm. And you can also go to jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar and just get it converted to your local time over there. And by the way, if you got yourself a Jupiter Broadcasting shirt or hoodie or whatever it is, send a picture to Angela at jupiterbroadcasting.com. She's collecting all of those, and we want to see them. Okay, everybody.
I got a T-shirt, a shirt, and a hoodie.
Good man. Good man. Yeah, I wore the hoodie on Faux Show, and today I'm wearing the long sleeve because it's cold out here. So I went warm. I went for warmth out. Got to go comfort.
Yep.
Okay. Very good. Thanks so much, everybody, for tuning this week's episode of TechSNAP. We'll see you right back here next week.